This story was from my past, a long time ago. Me and my friend Jake wanted a thrill just before school started. Summer was almost over, and Halloween was around the corner. We decided to go to the abandoned farmhouse that was known by everyone in our town. But if I had known what was waiting for us out there, I never would have set foot in that house. Jake pulled up to the place around midnight, cutting the engine to a quiet hum. The house loomed ahead, dark and silent, its windows staring back at us like empty eyes. It was hidden far from the main road, a good 5 minutes of driving through overgrown trees that blocked out the moonlight. No one came out here. Not anymore. Jake handed me the flashlight, grinning like he always did when he got an idea in his head that he knew was stupid but exciting. "You ready, Alyssa?" he asked, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the dashboard. I tried to laugh it off, not wanting him to see that I was nervous. "Of course," I said, giving a little shrug. "It's just an empty house, right?" We both knew it wasn't just an empty house. Everyone in town knew the story of the collector, the man who'd lived in the farmhouse decades ago. They said he was an artist who had lost his mind and taken to collecting people and his paintings. Or at least that was the innocent version of the story. The darker rumors said that he'd taken people for real, somehow luring them out to his farmhouse and then keeping them. Not that anyone ever found proof. The only fact was that every few years, someone went missing without a trace, and people in town blamed it on the spirit of the collector, who was supposedly still out there, always looking for more faces to add to his collection. Of course, we didn't really believe it. At least, that's what we told ourselves as we made our way up the creaking steps and into the darkness of the farmhouse. Inside, the place was thick with dust, and the air was so stale it felt hard to breathe. Our flashlights cut weak beams through the darkness, illuminating nothing but peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and strange stains on the floor that made my skin crawl. It looked like no one had been there in decades, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us. We wandered through the downstairs rooms, joking to keep ourselves calm. Maybe the collector's got his latest art pieces hiding somewhere, Jake whispered, and we both laughed, but it was forced. As we walked, we found odd things, like rusty nails and pieces of tattered clothing strewn around. It was unsettling, but we pushed on, driven by that stupid thrill-seeking instinct, even as the place started to get under our skin. Then we found the cellar door. It was hidden at the end of the hall, barely visible through the grime that covered the walls. Something about it seemed wrong, like it didn't belong there, but I couldn't figure out why. Jake shrugged and grinned. "Might as well check it out," he said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed that this was a bad idea, but I couldn't let Jake see me back down. So I followed him, holding my breath as he pulled open the door, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness, the air below even colder and thicker than upstairs. At the bottom, our flashlights caught the glint of something metallic. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and then it hit me. The walls were covered in photos, hundreds of them, all in rows, covering every inch of space. Each photo was of a person, men and women, young and old, their faces staring back at the camera with expressions that sent a chill down my spine. Some were scared, some seemed resigned, others had faces twisted in horror, and under each photo was a name, scrawled in rough, jagged handwriting. One name caught my eye: Anne Forsyth. She was the woman who'd vanished 2 years ago. I felt a prickling on my skin, a growing horror that twisted my stomach into knots. I turned to Jake, who was staring at the photos, his face pale. "These people are missing," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Jake nodded, his voice shaking. "But they're all here. All of them. How? This doesn't make any sense." The fear was overpowering now, filling me with a dread I'd never felt before. We had to leave. We had to get out of there. But then, from somewhere above us, we heard it. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving across the floorboards in the room right above us. We froze, barely daring to breathe. I looked at Jake, our eyes meeting in silent panic. We didn't need to say it, we both knew we had to get out before whoever was up there came down. We backed away from the wall of photos and started toward the stairs, moving as quietly as we could. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, like whoever was up there was taking their time, almost savoring the sound. We'd barely made it to the bottom of the stairs when Jake's flashlight flickered, revealing one more photo on the wall beside us. It was a photo of us, taken just minutes before, our faces filled with terror. Beneath it, in that same jagged handwriting, were our names. Alyssa and Jake. My blood ran cold, and Jake's hand tightened on mine. But before we could react, a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. A tall figure, its face partially hidden, with pale skin stretched tight across a skull-like face. The eyes were hollow, dark, and yet they gleamed with something alive and hungry. I could feel his gaze fixed on us, and that twisted grin sent a fresh wave of terror through me. "New faces," he rasped, his voice low and hollow, reverberating through the cellar. "Welcome to the collection." My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. We didn't wait. We bolted, rushing up the stairs, nearly stumbling as the man's footsteps thundered behind us. So close I could feel his breath. He was faster than he looked, and his heavy, rasping breaths grew louder, closer, as we burst into the hallway. We barely made it outside, the rain pelting our faces as we sprinted through the mud toward the car. Jake fumbled with the keys, and I glanced back, half expecting to see him right behind us. But he was gone. The doorway was empty, the house silent, the rain muffling everything but our pounding hearts. Jake threw the door open, and we tumbled into the car, slamming it shut just as something brushed against the window. My hands shook as I clicked the lock, not daring to look out, but I saw Jake's face, pale and stricken. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life as we tore out of there, not stopping until we were miles away, back in town where the lights of the gas station felt like a lifeline. We sat in the car, drenched and trembling, the horror of what we'd seen sinking in. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say. After a while, Jake's phone buzzed. He ignored it at first, but it buzzed again and again. When he finally looked, his face twisted in confusion. He turned the screen to me. It was a notification from an app neither of us recognized. New faces nearby, and below it was a photo of us, running through the rain, our faces frozen in terror. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the phone buzzed again. Another notification. Update to collection. And there, in the photo, was that figure standing behind us, grinning that same hollow, predatory grin. We stared, both too terrified to speak, feeling like prey caught in a trap. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that he's watching us. That maybe, just maybe, he's still adding to his collection. And the next face he finds might be yours. The neighborhood was still. All the houses lined up in a quiet, dark row at the end of the cul-de-sac. My house sat at the edge, half hidden by the massive oak tree in the front yard. The night had been ordinary enough, just me alone at home, tidying up, waiting for my Jack to come back from his night out with friends. I was used to being by myself, and usually, I liked the quiet. But tonight, there was something about the silence that felt different. It was deeper, heavier, like the whole house was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off, but my mind wandered to a story I'd read in the news last week. A string of break-ins had been happening in neighborhoods just like mine. My mom had even called twice this week to remind me to keep the doors locked. Jack and I had joked about it, saying I was prepared. But now, as the silence pressed in and the shadows deepened, I wasn't so sure. To ease my nerves, I went through my usual routine, checking the deadbolt on the front door, testing the latch on the windows, securing everything. I was being silly, I told myself. I'd double-checked everything already, but I kept going through each room, just to be certain. After a final check, I went upstairs, feeling foolish and ready to put my nerves to bed. But I didn't stay asleep long. A sound woke me, so faint at first I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again, a soft click, coming from downstairs. I sat up, listening, heart pounding. Maybe I'd left a window open and a draft had knocked something over. The house fell silent again, and I started to think it was just in my head. But then came another sound, a quiet dragging noise, like something heavy sliding across the floor. Goosebumps rose on my arms. I checked my phone. 2:13 a.m. It was too late to call Jack, and besides, he was probably asleep by now. I swung my legs out of bed, keeping my footsteps light as I crept to my bedroom door. I pressed my ear to it, barely breathing, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. That dragging sound came again, louder this time. My skin prickled. Someone was in my house. Hadn't I locked the door? I knew I had. I'd double-checked. But what if someone had a way in, anyway? I peeked into the hallway, the shadows stretching out before me, silent and still. Part of me wanted to just lock myself in the room and wait until morning. But my phone was charging downstairs on the kitchen counter, and I knew I'd need it if I was going to call for help. I tiptoed back to my room, searching for anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a small pair of scissors on my vanity. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Clutching them in my hand, I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway, forcing my feet to stay silent as I made my way to the stairs. As I reached the top of the stairs, a faint glow appeared at the bottom. My stomach nodded. I had left every light off when I'd gone to bed. But there, flickering against the wall, was a beam of light, a flashlight. My heart hammered, the sound roaring in my ears. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible as I watched the light sway and move. The footsteps were louder now, slow and deliberate. Whoever was down there, they weren't in a hurry. They were searching, moving from room to room. I held my breath, my mind racing. I could go back to my room, lock myself in, and hope he'd leave on his own. But if he was bold enough to break in, he might be prepared for more than just a locked door. No, I needed my phone. It was my only real chance. I gripped the scissors tighter, feeling the cold metal press into my palm. Then, taking slow, silent steps, I inched down the stairs. The light danced on the wall, throwing strange stretched shadows that seemed to flicker and jump in my vision. As I crept toward the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of him. A man stood in the middle of my living room, his back to me. He wore dark clothes and a hood, and he held a flashlight in one gloved hand, sweeping it slowly across the room. I stopped, frozen. He moved slowly, his gaze fixed on the walls, as if he was taking his time, savoring the moment. Then, the floor creaked beneath me. My breath caught in my throat as the man turned, the flashlight swinging toward me. I darted back behind the wall, praying he hadn't seen me. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I could hear him coming closer, his footsteps growing louder as he walked in my direction. I couldn't stay there, out in the open. I needed my phone, and I needed it fast. I made a dash for the kitchen, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move faster, to get away. I grabbed my phone off the counter, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. The call connected just as I ducked into the pantry, hoping to hide. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, steady, a lifeline. I whispered, barely able to keep the panic out of my voice. Someone's in my house. Please, he's right outside the pantry. Ma'am, stay on the line, she said. Help is on the way. Just stay as quiet as you can. I gripped the phone tightly, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could hear him outside, the slow, careful way he moved, as if he knew I was close but couldn't quite find me. The minutes stretched, each one longer than the last, every second a test of my nerves. Suddenly, his shadow appeared under the door. I sucked in a breath, pressing myself against the back of the pantry, willing myself to be invisible. I watched as the shadow shifted, getting closer. I could almost feel him standing there, listening. The door creaked. Slowly, almost like he was savoring it, he pulled it open. I tightened my grip on the scissors, ready to strike. But just as his hand appeared in the doorway, lights flooded the windows outside, and the blare of sirens cut through the silence. The man froze, his head snapping toward the front of the house. I didn't wait. I bolted, sprinting for the door as fast as I could. He shouted something behind me, but I didn't stop to listen. The front door burst open, and 2 officers rushed inside, guns drawn. They shouted at him to freeze, their voices sharp and steady, filling the house with commands. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the officers, then to me. For a split second, our eyes met, and I felt a chill down my spine, a look in his eyes that sent a shiver straight to my bones. Then, with one last glare, he turned and ran. The police were faster. They caught him before he made it to the back door. wrestling him to the ground as his flashlight skittered across the floor, illuminating his face. I watched, too numb to move, as they hauled him to his feet and dragged him outside. His face twisted into a sneer as he looked back at me one last time. The hours that followed felt like a blur of questions and explanations. The officer told me the man was suspected in multiple break-ins, that he had stalked his victims for days before striking. I was lucky, they said. I'd escaped with only a scare. But even after they left, even after they reassured me he was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling he'd left something behind. The silence of the house felt different now, like it was tainted, and every creak, every whisper of wind outside made me jump. I locked the door that night, checked it twice. But I knew I'd never truly feel safe here again. Not after I'd seen the look in his eyes. Not after I'd heard him in the silence, waiting, lurking, like he'd known all along I'd be here.